State is a crucial concept in React. And with our knowledge about state, we can now also make sure that we don't just create a dummy goal, but we actually reflect the real user input. So for that, let's go back to new goal. What we want to do is we want to store the user input in some variable on every keystroke so that we have the latest value entered by the user, and then pass that entered value to props on add goal, or to our new goal here, instead of that hard-coded dummy text we have at the moment. So here in new goal, I want to capture the user input here and send this instead of my hard-coded text here as part of the new goal. So we could create a variable here, user input or entered text maybe, which is an empty string initially. And here on input, there actually is an onChange event we can listen to, which is fired on every keystroke. So now we can add a function, text change handler. There we will get an event object, and that event object will hold the user input on event target, which refers to the input element dot value, and therefore we could set enter text equal to that. Now enter text will change with every keystroke once we bind onChange to text change handler, like this. Now here in new goal, we can use enter text, so what the user entered here, and then thereafter let's also console log the new goal here so that we can see that this works. If we now save this and I enter test here and I click add goal, we see this works and this is output here. This approach is generally fine, but it can have one tiny flaw. What if we want to reset this after adding a new goal? Of course, we can go to our add goal handler, and once we created the new goal, we can of course set enter text back to an empty string. But of course this won't do anything. If I enter this goal, you see this is not reflected here. Why is it not reflected? Because the new goal component didn't re-render. This is not state we're managing, this is a regular variable. So of course we can change it, of course we can use the changed value, but if we then set a new value to it, this is not reflected on our input because this input only has a connection to the text change handler. It does not know that it should reflect the current value stored in entered text. Now we could tell the input component that it should do so by binding its value prop. We can bind this to entered text, and with that we tell the input component, hey, the value displayed in the input should be the value stored in entered text. If we do that, we'll notice something new. Now we can't type there anymore. If I type here, the input is not reflected. Now if you think about it, that makes sense. What you're telling React is that input should be rendered such that the value is the entered text. With every keystroke, we change entered text, but entered text is not state, it's a regular variable. So that means that we change the variable with every keystroke, but React doesn't re-render the input component. It doesn't reflect the updated value. To React, the value always is an empty string because that was the last time it rendered this component and therefore this JSX code and therefore this input. So we need to tell React that this is some state and that when it changes, it should re-render our JSX code. So again, we can import use state here and convert entered text. Use array destructuring here, and use state is an empty string initially, or has an empty string initially here, because I'm managing my entered text, and the second element is a function to update the state, which I'll therefore call set entered text. And now here on every keystroke, I set my entered text to the value in event target value. And here we don't need that function form of updating the state because we have a brand new value that doesn't depend on the previous state. So we can just update the state like this. And now this will re-render this component whenever we type, whenever we call set entered text, so on every keystroke, which sounds horrible, but which is great. React will do this in a very efficient way. And therefore, this latest value will be reflected on the input element. And here in add goal handler, if we want to update enter text and reset it, we can therefore call set enter text and set it back to an empty string. And with that, we now have the best of both worlds. We can enter something here, that all works, but we also can manipulate it and reset after adding a new goal, like this. So this is now another use case for state management. And of course, there are many use cases in a React application. And here we are using state management to create something which is also sometimes called two-way binding. We're binding the value of the input, and on every keystroke, we're updating the value which we then bind back to the input, so that we always reflect the latest value inside of the input, but we also are able to manage this in a state-driven way, so that we also have a chance of manipulating the value from inside our code up here and reflect this back into the input in this case. With that, we have another scenario of state management, and we are now able to add our own goals.